Hey allies, it's Gabby. Welcome to this week's episode of The Missing Alliance. This podcast contains disturbing content that may be triggering to some listeners, including but not limited to graphic descriptions of violence, sexual assault, self-harm, and trauma. Listener discretion is advised. If you feel uncomfortable or distressed, please consider seeking support from a mental health professional or a helpline. On average, 20 people every minute in the United States are subjected to physical abuse by their intimate partners, resulting in over 10 million cases in a single year. A staggering 25% of women experience severe physical violence from their partners. Despite this, only 10 to 18% of those arrested for domestic violence are rearrested within 6 months. That number only increases to 15 to 30% within 28 months, and up to 60% within 10 years. These numbers are only for reported cases of abuse and don't reflect the true scale of the issue. It often takes a survivor 7 attempts on average to leave their abuser permanently and escape an abusive relationship. Unfortunately, this is also the most dangerous time for the victim. The statistics are alarming, and it helps us to shed some light on what might have happened to Ciera Breland. Ciera Locklair Breland is a spunky blonde with brown eyes. At 31 years of age, she was only 5 foot tall on a good day and 120 pounds, but had a ginormous personality. According to Kelly, Ciera's mother, her daughter was a bubbly, sweet, tender-hearted girl who attended Florida State before pursuing a career in law. Ciera was close to her father, Nick, who helped care for her while she was growing up, and this strengthened their bond even further. Ciera was a highly motivated individual and was inspired by her mother's hard work as a paralegal, which led her to follow in her mother's footsteps and become a lawyer.
She told me specifically today that she was correcting her in something when she was really young. She was probably like 12 or 13. And Ciera had already professed that she was going to be an attorney when she got older. And Kelly said, "I'm going to whip your tail." And Ciera said, "I'm going to call DFAX."
This week, I had the opportunity to speak with Blair Duncan, who has transitioned from being a family and domestic violence advocate to a dear friend of Kelly's.
My name is Blair Duncan. I am a resident of Carmel, Indiana. I have been advocating for Ciera since about 3 weeks after she was reported missing. And I've become very close with her mom and some other people that are really close to her case and her family. So as you can imagine, Kelly spends a lot of time thinking about what happened to her daughter. And she's, she has been a paralegal before, and she worked for a defense attorney. So she was kind of on, the other side of that. So she's been privy to information like this, potentially, about other people's children, and I'm sure that she never ever thought in a million bajillion years that she would be here, having these conversations about her own daughter.
Ciera's story has many complex layers, making it difficult to pinpoint exactly where it all began. From a young age, Ciera was a daddy's girl who adored the attention and affection of her father.
She was super close with her dad, and I've learned through talking with her parents that her dad was in the military, and he actually retired when Ciera was super young. And so her mom was the only one who left the house when Ciera was a kid to go to work as a paralegal. So Nick really was the stay-at-home dad with Ciera. And so that's kind of how that bond was, was put in there. And Kelly, says, I think that, maybe some of her sass came from being such a daddy's girl and things like that. Nick and Kelly are very sweet people. They are very private people. They are people who never, ever in a million years, had this not happened, would have ever put themselves out in the media for any reason. And they have a hard time with that even now. They are both very emotional people, especially Ciera's dad. She was a huge daddy's girl, and they were very close, and he's obviously torn up about what happened. But this has been a real life changer for both of them, as you can imagine. Oh, another interesting thing to know about her. This is such a cute story that Kelly told me. So Kelly was a paralegal. Her mom was a paralegal. And right as Ciera was passing the bar and becoming an attorney, Kelly was retiring. And so she actually helped Ciera get her first job. So Ciera's first job as an attorney was at Kelly's last job as a paralegal. And she actually sat in Kelly's office for the first little while until they got her an office with a window, and then she moved. So I think that's the cutest story.
As she grew older, her focus shifted to her education and career aspirations, with only occasional boyfriends in the picture. Her primary goal was always to succeed in her professional pursuits, and no man could measure up to the standard of love and care that her father had set for her, until she met Xavier. Ciera and Xavier swiped right on Tinder around October of 2020. In a sudden whirlwind of events, they found out she was pregnant around January, and then quickly married without even letting her family know ahead of time, using the pandemic and social limitations to explain away their seemingly spur-of-the-moment wedding. While originally meeting online, it's the belief of many that Xavier's true motivation for him to pursue the relationship was his plethora of legal issues she slowly uncovered.
I think it's really important to showcase, and I don't know how you go about doing this, but this was one thing that Kelly circled back to and wanted me to say, that she was always there for her family, and she was super focused in her career and all of the other things that you already know about her, until Xavier came along and she was manipulated and her personality completely changed. And for the last year of her life, she was a completely different person. And to rewind a little bit, the whole reason that I had any interest in this in the first place, once I started connecting the dots, is because I've been a victim of narcissistic abuse. And Ciera's husband is pretty much your textbook narcissist. And I actually kind of saw that in his photos on dating apps, which is definitely one of the reasons that we never connected. But, once I kind of put that together and I realized that we had kind of a similar thing, I actually called the police first. I reached out to Carmel PD and I just said, hey, this person who's just reported his wife missing, he's on dating apps. Maybe you already know that, but I just had to make sure that you did. As you know, these types of relationships are very textbook, and there have been so many times in so many of the cases that I've been close to, and especially Ciera, where facts about their relationship have come out, and every hair on my body stands up, just because I remember when that change happened. And I think because I have that understanding of, having been through things like that myself, I just think there's a side of that makes you understand how these people get so manipulated and why they can't just leave, and why they become such different people.
To piece together what happened to Ciera, we can look back in history to Xavier's shocking past behaviors in his previous relationships. Before I get started, I have spoken to Brittany, the woman whom has been frequently reported as his ex-wife. She has been a superwoman in breaking the silence, standing up after being a survivor of this domestic violence cycle. On April 1st of 2016, Xavier and Brittany went to file for a marriage license after being in a long-term relationship and with 2 beautiful children together. Before they were even able to file that paperwork, the honeymoon period was over, as Brittany was allegedly brutally assaulted and beaten unconscious by Xavier. Due to that altercation, she had ripped the license in half and made very clear to him she would never marry him. And with this, an avalanche of events began to unfold in a clear escalation in Xavier's behavior. I only say allegedly due to the legal implications, but I absolutely believe her in how this story unfolded, especially considering everything that has followed. The amount of domestic violence that goes unreported is staggering, and before you ask why, keep listening. Brittany and Xavier's romantic relationship ultimately ended in 2019, but legal battles over stalking continue on. Before meeting Ciera, Xavier did meet other women whose names have been changed for their privacy. One woman, we'll call her Kathy, dated Xavier from January 2020 until September of the same year, around the same point which he met Ciera. At the end of their relationship, Kathy had found a GPS tracker on her car and had gone to her local police department to file a report. She was filled with so much terror around that incident, she stayed in a different location with her 2 children for a few weeks until she felt safe enough to return. But that wasn't enough. About a month later, Kathy was in a car wreck. When her car was being towed onto the rig, the tow truck driver came over to her asking if she had known this was on her car, as he produced another GPS tracker matching the same description as the one she took to the police previously. On May 28, 2021, a felony aggravated stalking report was filed by Brittany. Keep in mind, this is shortly after Xavier and Ciera were married. At this time, Ciera had actually agreed to help Xavier in his legal battles and was his attorney on record. The probable cause reads, on March 12, 2021, at approximately 7:08 a.m., officers with the Noonan Police Department were dispatched to Brittany's house. She was claiming Xavier had placed a tracking device inside of a pink stuffed animal that he gave to their 5-year-old daughter. She stated that on March 11, 2021, Xavier dropped her daughter off at school, knowing that Brittany was scheduled to pick her up in the afternoon. Brittany said that there was an active temporary protective order along with an active aggravated stalking warrant for Breland. She stated that the following morning, when she was getting the animal to give to her daughter to bring to school for show and tell, she grabbed it and felt something inside. Brittany stated that the stuffed animal was then cut open and a tracking device was located. She also stated that this device was similar to one Breland had placed on her car in the past. The device is black in color with no serial number visible. There is a triangle-like symbol embossed in the center. Detective Kevin Black began investigating and obtained the stuffed animal, the tracking device, and the SIM card from inside the device. The stuffed animal was noticeably cut where Brittany and her husband had cut it open to retrieve the tracker, but another area was found that appeared to have been cut open and resewn using white thread. A court order was completed and submitted to Land Air Sea Corporation in reference to obtaining subscriber and account information. Upon receipt of the results from that court order, the customer information for the tracker showed and the name of Xavier Breland with his email address attached. There were 4 tracking devices shown under the account in Breland's name, one which matched the serial number recovered by Atlanta PD in December of 2020 from Brittany's vehicle, which Xavier admitted to placing in court documents involving the custody of their children. Another one of the trackers matched the SIM card number retrieved from the tracker that was located in the stuffed animal. I need to pause here to highlight how Kathy has also come forward with a very similar story, and reportedly the other 2 GPS trackers noted in this police report. The tracker shows being activated at 7:13 p.m. on March 10, 2021. The tracker's GPS location shows in the area of 8307 Milam Loop, Fairburn, Georgia, which was Xavier's address at that point in time. The tracker results show once leaving Milam Loop, it travels through Tyrone, Georgia, and into Peachtree City, Georgia. The tracker shows entering into a instant fence at 9:53 a.m. and stays within the fence until 2:42 p.m. when it's shown in Fayetteville, Georgia. A check of Land Air Sea's website shows that an instafence is a geofence that users are capable of drawing instantly around a specific area or zone. Once the tracker exits that zone, then the tracker begins sending notifications. The tracker travels through various cities until it arrives in the area of Brittany's home address around 3:53 p.m. It then stays stationary until 7:02 a.m. on March 12, 2021. It then shows traveling back inside of an instafence location inside the area of Fayetteville County. This incident of aggravated stalking is actually the charges which held Xavier in jail after the disappearance of Ciera.
I can give a little insight to that. living in the county where the court date happened and paying close attention to what happened in court, Indiana tried really hard to keep him in jail. I mean, he went into his court date and asked the judge to lower the bond amount from the $35,000 where it was set when court began that day. And that's just a standard bond for this type of charge, which is why it was set at $35,000. Some people had questions about that. He actually requested that Xavier requested that the judge lower that bond so that, quote, his mother could afford it so he could get out of jail. And instead of lowering it, the judge actually tripled it. So Indiana tried to keep him in jail. They raised that bond to $100,000. Indiana is a state with a surety bond. So he was able to put forth 10% of that in cash. So even though just a few weeks earlier in the state of Georgia, he was arguing in court with his attorney that he could not afford $10,000 and that he didn't have any money to get out of jail, he bonded out of jail in Indiana with $10,000 less than 24 hours after his initial hearing.
To expand upon this, there was a grievous error in the case against Xavier in the handling of that GPS data. When asked for clarification, Detective Black provided Brittany with insight via email. While I am unable to provide legal advice, I think I am allowed to discuss what I believe happened with the Coweta case. From my understanding, Land ARC did not respond to the DA's office request to authenticate the records that they had provided to me from my original legal process, being the search warrant. I think that because the records were not authenticated, I was unable to testify to them because that would be considered hearsay, which is not allowed during the trial. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, but from my limited understanding of the rules of trial, that is what I believe happened. As far as the time frame it takes to process a subpoena or similar court order, I originally presented Land ARC with the court order at the beginning of April of 2021 and received the results approximately 30 days later. There is no set time limit they have to process the order. Staffing levels would have a direct influence of the time it takes to complete it. Hopefully this helps a little. Very respectfully. Xavier has not been held or charged with Ciera's disappearance at this time. To compound this, Xavier had a history of threatening to make women disappear. In text messages, Xavier is seen going back and forth with Brittany. He says, "Keep thinking it's a game." She responds, "Our kids are no game. You're making the situation what it is." Xavier, "Which is why you won't see them." At this time, Brittany tells him then they will have to go to court to settle their custodial issues. What happened after that just makes my skin crawl as he sends her a shrugging emoji, followed by a link to a People's article about Michelle Parker, the Florida mom who vanished after appearing on the People's Court. For context, Michelle Parker vanished the same day she and her ex-fiancé were on People's Court over her engagement ring. The episode aired on November 17th, 2011. On that day, she dropped her twins off with said ex-fiancé before running some errands and going to work. But she never arrived. Her vehicle was found abandoned, and even while her phone was found in a nearby lake, Michelle has never been seen or found to this day. As if this wasn't enough, he continued on threatening her how he has her kids and that he would call her job to get her fired, but he, quote, "He's self-employed, so I can't get fired, but hard times ahead for you, kiddo. I will make your life a living hell." Throughout all of this, it's so important to remember there is Ciera being spun a story of toxic exes and Xavier's innocence as he cuddles up to her at night and makes her nice dinners, filling that jigsaw puzzle piece that was missing in her otherwise content life. On February 19th, Ciera, Xavier, their 5-month-old child, and her Labradoodle Baker traveled to Georgia. Ciera and her baby went to her parents' house while Xavier took Baker to his mother Rochelle's house in Johns Creek to await an upcoming court date he had to attend on February 23rd in regards to the stalking case. During that entire day, Ciera was flooded with messages from Xavier, making her doubt her intentions of never returning to Indiana. Ciera knew she had to pick up her first love, Baker, and the original plan was for Nick to go with her. But after all the messages, I could assume full of love and apologies, what's the worst that could happen? What exactly occurred during those days in Rochelle's house is unclear, but the limited information available paints a worrying picture.
It was a planned trip, but I personally have some questions about why the trip was planned and exactly why it happened during that period of time. We know now that there was a court date, that Xavier was set to appear in person in Georgia. And so I personally think that the trip was planned when Ciera was still his attorney on record. And therefore, she was an officer of the court and she had an obligation to show up there with her client. And so by the time the trip came along, she was no longer his attorney on record, I don't believe. She may have still been. I don't know that for sure, but I really think that the timing of that trip originally had something to do with that. Xavier did not ever go to Nick and Kelly's house on that trip. They actually went straight to his mother's house, where he was dropped off with Baker, the dog. And then I think Ciera spent the night there that first night. She may have or not, but then she ended up leaving and going to Cleveland, Georgia, which is where her parents live, with the baby. And she and the baby stayed there. And then eventually, after a lot of phone calls and video calls where Xavier was sobbing and begging for her to come and talk to him and pleading, and I'm sure love bombing her and all of those things, she finally agreed to go back over to Duluth or Johns Creek, whatever you call it. I don't really understand the difference, to his mother's house to talk to him. And I actually found out something interesting this week when I was talking with Kelly. Nick was originally supposed to go with her. She had originally asked her dad to go back over there with her. And then she talked to Xavier a few more times and then told Nick she was going to go by herself.
At 11:17 p.m. on Monday the 21st, after only being there for a day, Ciera sent a text message to her dad saying, "I'll be back in the morning if that's okay." He responded with, "Of course it's okay. You don't have to ask." However, Ciera did not return to her parents' house the following day, and when no one heard from her, they tried to continue to text her. Ciera did initially respond, letting them know that everything was okay, but she hadn't been feeling very well. In hindsight, and with context from other sources, it appeared that things were far from okay, and that the entire time that they were there, it was a continual barrage of arguments. It is important to highlight that while Ciera was previously his attorney, she had gotten tired of the Kool-Aid and actually recused herself from being his counsel any longer, and he was on his own for this court date. Nick continued to follow up asking if she was feeling any better, but got no response, which was downright bizarre for their relationship. That is, until they got an alarming call from Carmel, Indiana police asking questions about their daughter and her disappearance. On February 26, 2022, Xavier went to the Carmel, Indiana Police Department, claiming to be a concerned and loving husband whose wife had walked off into the night wearing only shorts and a tank top after an argument about her Adderall medication. According to Xavier, Ciera left behind her cell phone, purse, and keys. For those that might not be familiar, it was only 27 degrees Fahrenheit that day in Carmel, Indiana, so the clothing choice alone rose some alarm about exposure to the elements. The police responded promptly, launching a massive search effort that included neighborhood and business canvassing, utilizing dogs to track her scent and searching the nearby Chattanooga River. Not only that, but a pair of shorts and a shirt that matched the description were discovered by a local on Sunday afternoon by the dumpster at the CVS that she would have been walking to if she were going to pick up her Adderall prescription. But was she ever there? Or was all of this an elaborate ruse to try and hide what actually had happened? Despite these extensive efforts, no trace of Ciera was found, which surprised everyone involved in that Indiana search. The dogs were unable to pick up any scent of her in her impeccably clean vehicle, which I'm not sure if you have ever taken a 10-hour-long road trip but I could attest that if 2 adults, a baby, and a dog were in that car, it would be far from pristine. Not only that, but this was Ciera's daily vehicle. For there to be no traces of her in it, I will let you make your own conclusions. This revelation led investigators to shift their focus and begin exploring other angles on the case. When Nick was informed of Ciera's disappearance, he texted Xavier's father, who actually lived next door to their house in Carmel, to ask if he had seen her return. But Xavier's father responded that he had not seen her return either. On March 21st, the FBI released a statement that there was no evidence that Ciera had ever returned home, and that her last known location was captured on a video at 7:17 p.m. outside her mother-in-law's house in Johns Creek, Georgia. So let's look closer. In other court records filed March 28th, only 1 week after the FBI statement, Rochelle sued her daughter Crystal, who had also been living in the house where Ciera was last seen. This whole court charade started by having it served to Rochelle's house where Crystal was no longer residing, leading up to this letter written to the court I want to include, for further reason right after. I just received notice on May 11th, 2022 that the court appearance date was May 10th of 2022 and asked that we please reschedule so that I could be present. I wish to file a notice to appeal due to the missing court date, as I removed my family from the location of my mother's residence on April 21st, and do wish to appear in court or via Zoom to submit my evidence and dispute her false claims of damages requesting $10,000 and her being granted $1,000. Furthermore, we never had a landlord-tenant relationship of any kind, agreement for rent, nor bills to be paid by me, verbal or written. I would like to continue with my counterclaim of harassment, asking her to pay $10,000 for putting my 3 kids, fiance, and I with my unborn baby through emotional stress since moving in, and it getting worse due to me failing to agree to pay any money towards my brother Ciera Breland's owed court fees of $13,000 on March 26th of 2022 to help him to get released from jail due to an aggravated stalking case against my ex-sister-in-law, Brittany. I'm 38 years old and pregnant, and she is overwhelming, pathological liar, very vindictive and calculating. Yet she is my mother, and I do seek for her to have help and or a guardian as soon as possible. Not only that, but I have evidence of what happens when you go against her and don't agree with something and she doesn't like it. So does my ex-sister-in-law, who she is also suing for non-payment of rent on a property my mother owned in Fairburn, Georgia, that my brother was legally responsible for while she was a stay-at-home mom. Being a paralegal for over 25 years, she abuses the justice system and always has since I was a young lady. Yes, I wish to fight her lies, not have these false accusations on my record, and countersue for harassment of $10,000, which I have witnesses who could testify as well. Signed, Crystal Breland. This whole court case doesn't seem to go anywhere, but had one absolutely crucial detail in Crystal's answer that illuminates a missing piece of the puzzle of what happened to Ciera. She stated, "This is my mother. We vacated her home on April 21st as originally planned. She wants $10,000 because she paid $13,000 to my brother's Xavier's ex and mother of his kids' attorney so they would release him from jail. CSI came, cut her carpet and mattress because my sister-in-law Ciera Breland is missing after residing in her home with their dog. Cut her carpet and mattress. What happened to Ciera? Why is her son growing up in a world without his mother? What did they find that day that makes the FBI and all investigating parties positive Ciera Breland never left Georgia? Someone knows something."
Ciera had plans to leave that relationship even long before she tried. I think that she was just waiting for kind of the perfect opportunity, which unfortunately really presented itself when they were in Georgia. And if we could just turn back time and keep her from taking that phone call and going back over to his mother's house to speak to him, I think, it would all be different. But absolutely. I mean, it took her a little bit to get there, as it does, but she was definitely in the place where she no longer wanted to be in the relationship, but she definitely was not going to put Xavier in the position where he would ever have Jackson alone.
In light of hearing Ciera's family struggle and the collateral trauma, I reached out to Michelle Rosenthal, an award-nominated trauma author and trauma recovery specialist.
I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but the news is sensationalized by design. So, I mean, we see that whether you're checking out the grocery store at the National Enquirer's outrageous cover stories, or you're turning on the news and depending on who the advertisers are or whether or not there is advertising. I mean, there's no pure reporting anymore. I don't know that there ever was, but if there ever was, there definitely is not anymore. And so I don't think there's a way for trauma survivors to reclaim control. A lot of the people that I have worked with, their families have been completely ignored. The trauma survivor comes in for help, and then the families are all struggling, and nobody talks about, well, here's what you can do, and here's what you need to know. I remember in my own journey, I was always, I had trauma at a time where nobody was talking about trauma. So when I ended up with PTSD, it was at a time nobody was talking about it. And I remember I had no clue what was wrong. I just thought I was crazy, but I was able to identify bits and pieces of crazy that people had written a book about. And I would bring the book to my mother and be like, you need to read this book because this describes a little piece of what's going on for me. And my poor mother would read the book, but then what do you do with it? So I think supporting and educating families about how they can maintain their dynamics and their own sanity while they're also helping, at some point, hopefully, the person who's had the trauma is a critical piece that's too often missing.
Families are the unsung trauma victims in the world of missing persons and true crime. Ciera's parents have not only had the burden of having no answers to their daughter's disappearance, but of also caring for her son. The barrage of media weighs heavy on their souls. The toll that is paid with the media is steep, and with social media can be even steeper.
It's big T trauma if you love that person. Secondary trauma is real. People get PTSD from watching a loved one die. Now, you could say, well, it didn't happen to you. Well, true, you're still alive, but you just watched someone that you feel so connected to pass away. That is big T trauma, even though it didn't, quote unquote, happen to you.
We're privy not only to the direct victim's trauma and story unfolding, but their loved ones around them as well. We can't control everything, but we can control what we consume. Flocking to tabloids to argue in the comments and sharing it to show how awful it is fuels the narrative they put out, because it sells. Even bad publicity is good publicity in the world of media. Some families are more private than others, but that doesn't imply insidiousness. There is a difference between being private and being isolated. Domestic violence is a plague that has only been broadened by the pandemic, with how easy it's been to isolate victims from their families and the outside world. Domestic violence is a plague that has only been broadened by the pandemic, with how easy it is to isolate victims from their families and the outside world. I have run a group for Ciera for the last year as the anniversary of her disappearance quickly approaches, and I could confidently tell you that while you have all listened to this episode, so has Xavier. So do you, Xavier. We see you. The cycle of abuse and trauma only works and continues when the victims are silent and yours are talking. You could say they're screaming from the cliff tops. If you are local to Duluth or Johns Creek, Georgia area and are on dating sites, look up and know Xavier's face. We won't stop until we know what happened to Ciera Breland.
There haven't really been any huge new developments. Anytime that we get word that they're searching for her somewhere, it always, comes up, obviously, that they haven't found anything that they can share with us. Obviously, we know that doesn't mean that there is nothing. We do know that the investigation is ongoing. It is not cold. There's nothing cold about it. As we approach the 1 year mark, we still have heavy involvement from the law enforcement in Georgia, Indiana, and the FBI. So I do have faith that they'll find her. I hope that, like I said in our conversation the other day, I sure hope you're right. It would be so amazing if we could find her.
If you or someone you love is in a toxic relationship, you can reach out for anonymous, confidential help 24/7. Please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. That's 1-800-799-SAFE. If you'd like to speak to Michelle about your trauma recovery, you could reach her.
We should start with Twitter because that's where we met. So at My Trauma Coach, and then you can head over to mytraumacoach.com to download a free brain training audio. It's designed to train the brain for peace and calm, which is ultimately what we all need, whether we're the trauma survivor or the family member. So you can hit me up there. Thank you so much, Gabby, for inviting me to chat about this. It's so important, and it's really delightful to be with you.
You are loved. You are worthy. You deserve to be safe. Thanks for tuning into today's episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please consider leaving me a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners like you. And don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on new episodes and behind-the-scenes content. Just search for The Missing Alliance. We love hearing from our listeners, so feel free to reach out with any comments or suggestions for future episodes. Remember, being an ally is an ongoing journey, and we encourage you to continue educating yourself and taking action to support the missing community. We'll be back with more stories and perspectives to help you deepen your understanding and expand your empathy. Thanks again for listening and being an ally. We'll catch you on the next one.